think Carl will tell you a little bit more about what's going on. Anyway, I'd just like to thank you for coming, and hopefully you all got door prize tickets. If anybody wants to purchase additional tickets, they're $1 a piece, and you can raise your hand and I can come by and sell you some.
Okay, the obligatory announcement, please turn your phones off, silence them. Just turn my sound off. Yeah, the raffle things are there. We do see these Saturday programs in February as one of our major times to raise a little bit of money to keep the doors open. So we encourage you to sign up as a member down at the desk downstairs, or put some money in the sock that I'm going to pass around. And the other thing, of course, is to buy a raffle ticket. Eric has some extra ones there. Here are the things that will be raffled today. Roger Nichols, a genuine U.S. silver dollar, more than 100 years old. It's a value of $35 or more. And Roger was ready to look at coins last week after the program, but we kind of got swamped with people and ran out of time. So if anybody was not able to do that last week and brought their coins along, Roger is here. He will take a look at your coins. We have a refrigerator magnet from Sandy Bissett on our board. Sheila Dooley has put together these little coasters. We have a set of coasters to raffle off today. We have a picture frame and a cross that Linda Wilson has donated. And once again, if you'd like a little bit more chance, Eric will sell you another ticket for $1.
We also have
we
six
have
for $5. 6 for $5. Six tickets for $5 or $1.
6 tickets for $5. Okay. So Eric has them right here, and we have 2 books. One book is one Eric's lifting up right now. It's the book that I wrote about buildings here in the Dalles, architecture and history of some of the buildings around town. And while he's holding that up, I can invite you all to come to the Art Center next Friday night for the official launch of that book. I'll be telling a little bit more about how I got into that project and how it came together. The other book is Rooted, Doris's book, and she has graciously donated one of them to be raffled today. She also has books for sale, and same thing with my book. There's for sale downstairs, but Doris has some up here, and I think some more downstairs. So if you're interested in the books, you will have those after the meeting today. Your raffle ticket will be put back into the final drawing that will happen the last week, and we'll give away one of these caps. Eric happens to be wearing one. That will be one of the prizes. Linda Wilson has an Sensi Antler Lodge warmer lamp. So that will be that last week. And Stephanie Rickert, one of our board members, donating a night at Old McDonald's Farm down
Outside of Corbin.
Outside of Corbin. So yeah, that would be a nice final gift. So I think that's about all. We'll have coffee and cookies downstairs, and the coffee has been donated by Victor Johnson. The Dalles Tea and Coffee is his official title of that, but puts together some good coffee, and you get to sample some of that today. I think maybe that's all I have to say about the preliminaries. So we welcome Doris Smith today, who is our speaker, and good that we have other relatives that showed up and a lot of Mosier people that showed up, because this gets right into the very history of that community. Doris comes from the original roots that you're going to hear about. 5 generations buried there in the Mosier Cemetery. She got into family history when she retired from her career as a teacher. Lived in Yakima for 7 years, but then has been here for 9 years. She writes columns for the Mosier Valley News and is interested in family history, but doing a lot of that work since her retirement. So give Doris a big welcome.
Well, thank you so much for coming. And just out of curiosity, how many of you have a Mosier connection? Good. How many of you have a root connection? A little fewer, but still good. Good. Well, everyone who spends time writing a book will say that it was a labor of love, and I'm no different. My original reason for researching and gathering facts about Amos and Hannah Root was to help my family learn the story of their ancestors. However, when I was finished, I realized that the book had 2 more benefits. First, it contains a lot of Mosier history. Anyone who wants a glimpse of the early years of Mosier will find it in this book. It also contains many historical Mosier pictures. The other thing this book does is to provide a template for any other potential author wanting to preserve his or her family history. In other words, if I can do it, you can do it. And this book may be purchased when this presentation ends. In 2014, Mosier celebrated its centennial. Now this seems like a curious date because the Jonah Mosier family arrived in that area in 1854. But it took until 1914 before the town was officially incorporated, and so that explains the date. To help with the celebration, 9 of us with ancestors buried in the Mosier Cemetery chose one of them, wrote a story about their life and memorized it, dressed in vintage clothing and told their stories on the stage at the Mosier Gym. And there are a few of those people in here. Raise your hand if you did that. Yep. We call this program Mosier's Voices from the Past. I chose my great-grandmother, Hannah Root, and I would like to tell you her story today. My name is Hannah Holdeman Root. I was born in the little town of Wakarusa, Indiana, in 1850. I loved my growing up years, surrounded by aunts and uncles, cousins, brothers and sisters. We were part of a Mennonite community. Our aim was to live godly lives and help our neighbors, and those ideas stuck with me all my life. I liked my time in school so much that I didn't want to leave, so I became a teacher. During my summer vacations, I looked for ways to help others. Oh, sometimes I would help older ladies clean their houses, and sometimes I would help people write letters because in those days not everyone could read and write. One day I was helping a lady write a letter to her son. He was off in Colorado mining for gold, and she looked across the table and said to me, "Honey, do you have anybody special in your life?" Well, no, I didn't, and since I was almost 21, people were thinking of me as an old maid. She told me that when her son came home, she would introduce us. Well, she did just that, and it was love at first sight. Oh, that Amos Root, so tall and handsome. We fell madly in love. Yes, he was 17 years older than I was, but that did not matter a bit. After a short time, we decided that we wanted some adventure in our lives. So we eloped to the next town and got married and kept going until we came to Chicago, where we climbed onto a train. The Transcontinental Railroad had been completed just 2 years before in 1869, and we wanted to see the Wild West we had heard so much about. Well, after several days on the train, we arrived in San Francisco, but we didn't like it. Too many people. So we climbed onto a steamer and headed up the coast to Portland, Oregon. On the boat, we visited with some folks who told us that if we were interested in farming, the Willamette Valley was the place to go. We ended up at a little town called Harrisburg, where we stayed for several years. But after a while, Amos became frustrated because the Willamette Valley had too much rain. Thank you. So we loaded all of our worldly belongings into a wagon and headed east over the Cascades, following the Santiam wagon road. Now I'm going to step away from Hannah for just a minute to quote some information about this road from the Rooted book. The Santiam wagon road was built between 1861 and 1869. It closely followed traditional Indian trails across the Cascade Mountains. Most wagon roads of that time were constructed to help settlers reach the Willamette Valley. But by this time, the valley was becoming crowded with new arrivals, and so much of the prime farmland had already been claimed. So this road was designated to take travelers to the rich grazing lands of central and eastern Oregon. The Santiam wagon road began at Lebanon, but the routes may have traveled from Harrisburg to Brownsville and then joined the wagon road at Sweet Home, where a toll gate had been established. Information from the Deschutes Land Trust says that this road served as a livestock trail and the only freight route over this section of the Cascades for most of the 74 years it was in use. It provided passage for around 5,000 wagons in the early years of its use. Today, US Highway 20, also called the Santiam Highway, closely follows the Santiam wagon road. Enthusiasm was high during the late 19th century for sheep raising, and by 1900, 20,000 square miles of Central Oregon were devoted to wool, wheat, cattle, and sheep production. Okay, back to Hannah. After crossing the Cascades, we landed at a place called Cherry Creek, where we stayed for a couple of years. By this time, we had 2 children, a son and a daughter, and while we were at Cherry Creek, our 3rd child arrived. We purchased 1,000 head of sheep and spent most of our time taking care of them. Years later, when we thought back to those Cherry Creek days, we agreed that things were pretty rustic, but we had each other and we had the kids, and we got by just fine. And once again, to quote from the book, the logistics remain a mystery, but sometime in 1874 or 1875, Amos and Hannah arrived at Cherry Creek, which was then in Wasco County, but is now in the far northeastern corner of Jefferson County, bordering Wheeler County, not far from the Burnt Ranch and the Painted Hills. It was a hard scrabble existence among the bunchgrass, sagebrush, junipers, and boulders of Central Oregon. Root Gulch can be found on some maps of the area. It is one of the numerous draws or gulches in the area, which drain into Cherry Creek and then into the John Day River. Family memoirs continue this story. Father had a wagon and a team of horses, so he took what was needed for a long trip and moved to eastern Oregon, a place called Cherry Creek. Their trading post was Canyon City, although either Antelope or Mitchell would have been closer. Amos Root then bought 1,000 head of sheep and moved his family out into the wilds of that rough country. Their home was a rough shack, or just a dugout in the side of a mountain. It had a tarp for a door and flour sacks for windows. To cook, they had what was called an out oven, which was a hole dug in the ground, lined with rocks with a sheet iron on top. They built a fire in the rocks, and when they got hot, they put the fire out and put in bread or cakes or whatever they wanted to bake, and they came out of the oven a golden brown. Leo Root was born in the Cherry Creek Hills in July of 1876. One incident that happened when Leo was a baby. Mother was out helping father brand sheep. Their children, Alice and Elmer, were tending the baby. Elmer said to Alice, "Let's brand the baby." Elmer got a bale wire from a bucket and put it into the fire to heat. He wanted to brand the baby's cheek, but Alice said, "No, that would hurt. Let's brand his shoe." So that is what they did, and Alice and Elmer got spanked on the butt. More family memoirs from Alice, the oldest daughter. When I was 4 years old, Father wanted to go into the sheep business, so he loaded our things into a wagon and struck out for Central Oregon. We settled on Cherry Creek near Burnt Ranch. He then got a bunch of sheep and built a shack and a dugout that was made into a hillside with a roof and only one window. It had a dirt floor. Oh joy, no scrubbing. Mother made a stove from a couple of flat rocks. When they were hot, they would scrape out the ashes, put in the bread, and it came out just as good as oven baked. There are so many unanswered questions about those Cherry Creek years. How did they replace groceries and other necessary supplies? Did they ever take a trip to town, and if so, what town? Were they able to send and receive mail? Where did 1,000 head of sheep graze? Did they own the land, or were they just squatting? How did they endure the brutal chill of winter months? Amos and Hannah were not used to luxury, but they had almost always lived in houses that had doors and windows. Hannah had been a school teacher, played the piano, and was an accomplished dressmaker. The very primitive life at Cherry Creek seemingly offered little comfort or opportunity for pleasurable pursuits. Okay, leaving the book and returning to Hannah at Cherry Creek. One day a neighbor arrived to say that there was an Indian uprising not far from us and we should run for our lives. Amos decided that no Indians were going to get his sheep. Once again, we threw everything we owned into a wagon, loaded up our 3 small children, and I started driving the wagon, heading for the safety of Fort Dalles. Amos was going to follow us, bringing the sheep. Now, I didn't want to leave him, but he insisted. So I took off down the road with my 3 small children bouncing in the wagon behind me, leaving my husband far back in the distance. After some time, we came to a muddy bog in the center of the road, and when I tried to drive around it, the wagon slid clear off the road. To make matters worse, as I was trying to push the wagon, I heard a loud snap. I had broken my arm. Oh no. We huddled by the side of the road, and after what seemed like ages, Amos finally caught up to us. Oh, he did charge, getting the wagon back onto the road, splinting my arm, putting it into a sling, and putting me back up in the driver's seat. And once more the children and I took off for the Dalles. We reached there several days before Amos did. When he got there, we sold the sheep for $1 a head. We spent the winter in a cabin above the old surgeon's quarters up at Fort Dalles. And in the spring, we began to look around for a more permanent place to settle. In 1878, we found the perfect place. It was a homestead of 160 acres, not far from Mosier. The land was covered in timber, but it had a rough cabin, and the original owner was willing to sell. We used our sheep money to purchase this land, and we named our new farm Rosedale. Oh, I had visions of the beautiful flowers I would grow there someday, and in later years, those dreams came true. Well, Amos went right to work clearing the land, getting it ready for planting fruit trees, and I got busy raising a garden, cooking and canning, and taking care of our growing family. As the years passed and Amos cleared more land, we were soon in the fruit raising business. I was so proud of that man. Amos is credited with being one of the first to plant a commercial dryland orchard in the Mosher district. He was also one of the founders of the Mosher Fruit Growers Association and was president of the board for many years. At Rosedale, we raised peaches, pears, prunes, cherries, apples, and other kinds of fruit. By 1900, we had built a large home, a large barn, followed by a packing house and other outbuildings. And today, over 100 years later, most of those buildings are still standing. By 1892, our family was complete, 4 boys and 4 girls. In order to make it easier for the children in our area to get an education, Amos and I deeded some land for a schoolhouse to be built. The number 8 schoolhouse, or the Rosedale School as it was sometimes called, was located on the corner of State Road and Root Road, and all of our children attended school there. In those early years, before there were any church buildings in Mosher, a minister would come to number 8 once a month for a day of preaching, followed by a lot of socializing and good food. Well, besides raising kids and keeping meals on the table, here are some things I really enjoyed. I loved having people come to our home. Our house at Rosedale was often filled with friends, and we enjoyed games, laughter, good food, music, and dancing until the wee hours. It became a tradition for my family to gather at our home for a big celebration on New Year's Day. At the end of each school year, we would invite all the families from the number 8 district to come to Rosedale for a big dinner to honor the teacher. And oyster feed seemed to be everyone's favorite. As the years rolled by, I became active in many Mosher organizations, and when we built a house in town, my socializing was easier than ever. When Emmanuel Church, you know it today as the Grange Hall, was built in 1898, I became part of that church and was a Sunday school teacher for the rest of my life. Sometimes when we did not have a minister, the members would take turns leading the singing and giving talks. I became the first woman to ever be a leader of a service at that church. I attended Sunday school conventions as a delegate from my church, and I became very active in the Ladies' Aid Society. Oh, nearly every lady in Mosher joined the Ladies' Aid. We met every other week. We would have a speaker, a wonderful social time, and delicious refreshments. And I was always glad to take my turn hosting these meetings. Our annual fundraiser was the Christmas Bazaar, and I made many fancy needlework items to sell. I also held office in the Civic Improvement Club, the Grange, and the Royal Neighbors. In 1912, Oregon passed a law to allow women to vote, and at the next election, I was the first woman in Mosher ever to cast a ballot. Well, we also experienced hardships over the years, as every family does. My first grandchild, a beautiful little girl named Hannah Muriel, my namesake, died at the age of 9 months and is buried in the Mosher Cemetery. And my third daughter, Nora, painfully ill with consumption, died at age 32, leaving behind 4 young children. Sometimes life can be very hard. And so the years flew by. Do you remember that I told you that my dear Amos was 17 years older than I was? Well, in 1923, as he was about to turn 90, his mind became confused. Now, in those days, no one knew the words dementia or Alzheimer's, but I could tell things were getting bad with him. Amos, in his twisted thinking, had worked out a plan so that I would not be left alone in this world. And so, we both died on the same day. And today we lie side by side in the Mosier Cemetery. Most would consider my ending a tragic one, but Amos was not thinking clearly, and I've forgiven him. I want to leave you with two ideas that came from my Mennonite upbringing. Help your neighbors and live godly lives. Although Amos and I began our lives seeking adventure, in the end, we found our happiest years being part of the small community of Mosier, Oregon. Thank you.
Questions?
Question over here.
So is the original farm still in the family and lived on by
It is
the
not in
family?
the family, but the owner is here today. Raise your hand, Jeannie. So Jeannie Reed's family bought Rosedale, and it's continuing to be run. And as I said earlier, most of the old buildings are still standing there.
And is it an orchard still?
It still is, yeah.
Some of the original property is still in root ownership.
Yeah.
And that's now classed as a century farm.
That's true.
Anybody else?
One thing I thought was interesting was, I looked up the Cherry Creek Ranch. A couple of years ago, my husband and I got off the highway at Ashwood and went on a long dirt county road to find Cherry Creek Ranch, and it was for sale at that time, and last year it was purchased by the Wildlands Conservancy. They purchased 30,000 acres of Cherry Creek Ranch for $16.5 million. They renamed the ranch the Enchanted Rocks Preserve. And then the other thing that I was going to say was when Hannah was driving that wagon with her little kids, she was following the Dallas to Canyon City Military Road, because in 1862, when gold was discovered at Canyon City, they improved that road enough so that wagons could go on it. And she followed it past Burnt Ranch, Antelope, Cross Hollows, which is Shanico, and Shears Bridge, and finally arrived at the Dalles, which was a pretty big undertaking for someone who had never driven on that road before and didn't know it, but anyway.
So it sounds like there were family diaries. Is that where you got a lot of the information?
There were some, not a diary, but written family memoirs. But we're very fortunate that we're in the mid-Columbia area where there are lots of newspapers. I think I found a microfilm from 9 newspapers that had Mosier News in them, and almost every week a correspondent would send news in. And that's really the only way we knew what our family did from week to week. You know, some months, some weeks, some months there wouldn't be any news, but sometimes it was pretty good, so.
Now, Hannah was related to you by,
She's my great-grandma.
great.
And then are you descended from a son or a daughter?
I'm descended from a daughter who married into the Evans family. So my mother was an Evans.
And that was a Mosier family?
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
How long did it take you to write the books?
It's very off and on, so I'm gonna tell you the time and you'll go, oh my gosh. But I wasn't doing it all the time, but it took about 10 years of just a little here and a little there. But toward the end, I won't say I went to the library every day, but I went 3 or 4 times a week and would sit for hours staring at the microfilm, which will suck your eyeballs right out of your head after a while. But, what valuable information. We're very fortunate that we have all that preserved
And that's in the Dallas Library?
in the Dallas, yeah. The librarians were great help.
What's the next book, Doris?
Well, my cousin Addie here would like me to write Rooted Volume 2, which may happen if I live long enough. But also, Penny Kennedy, another friend, and I have talked for years about all the good stories there are from people buried in the Mosier Cemetery. And we've kind of thought maybe it would be fun to pull some of those stories together and tell them before they're completely lost. So I'm divided.
Where's the picture? Where's that picture?
You know what? That's not a local picture. It looks like a local picture, and I wanted something that had plants growing for rooted, but this was furnished by the publishing company. They said, you can choose from our free covers, or we can have an artist make a cover for you. And so I chose from their free covers, and then they sent me a thing saying, oh, our artist was all excited. Here's what he came up with. It was pink with a few leaves on it, and I went, yeah, I don't think so. Yeah. Anyway, well, thank you so much for coming. Anybody else? Yeah.
I was just gonna ask, did you go to the Prineville Museum for county, I don't know what they call it, no, that's not the name of it. But there was a considerable museum in Prineville.
Oh, no, I
that covers
didn't.
a lot of Central Oregon and Cherry Creek. A lot more history about that would be there.
Yeah.
My ancestors, I know they went from the valley to Prineville area and settled in the, what we call Willowdale Valley, which is a foot of Cow Canyon, as ranchers. Well, that would have been probably the 1870s, and some of them went to Antelope in the 1870s and settled. My grandparents were both born in Antelope. So, but Prineville, I mean, that library, that historical society puts out a sort of a magazine history once or twice, I think it's once a year, that has a lot of history about Central Oregon.
Good.
Anybody else? Let's give Doris a hand and